The wind whistled through the pine trees, rattling the window panes of Ethan's cabin. He loved that sound, nature's quiet symphony, untainted by the chaos of the outside world. For years, this mountain retreat had been his sanctuary, a place where he could breathe, think, and exist without interference. He took a slow sip of coffee, feeling the warmth seep into his hands, and let his eyes drift over the snowy landscape. Then he heard it. A metallic groan, deep and unnatural, slicing through the crisp mountain air. His brow furrowed. It was distant at first, like the sound of machinery waking from a deep slumber, but it grew louder, mechanical, grinding, intrusive. Something was moving. Ethan stepped onto his porch, boots crunching in the fresh snow. The sight stopped him cold. Suspended in the sky, gliding over his land like a slow-moving predator, was a chairlift. Brightly colored seats dangled from thick steel cables, carrying bundled-up skiers and snowboarders overhead. For a long moment he simply stared. A group of riders swung past. One of them, a teenage boy in a neon-green jacket, leaned over the safety bar and grinned. "Hey, nice cabin, man," he called before his voice was swallowed by the wind. Ethan's fists clenched. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be happening. He stormed down the steps, past the tree line where his property ended, and followed the lift's path. The poles supporting the cable had been drilled into the earth at precise intervals, their bases cemented in place. One of them stood no more than 20 feet from his cabin, its hulking steel frame an ugly scar against the pristine landscape. The chairs swayed slightly as they carried passengers up the slope, each passing shadow and invasion. Anger surged through him. He had fought this. He had sat through every excruciating HOA meeting where they dangled proposals and platitudes in front of him, promising they would never build on his land, and that no changes would impact his privacy. What? He needed answers. The HOA office was nestled at the base of the resort, a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and a lobby that smelled of pine-scented cleaning products. Ethan shoved through the glass doors, his pulse pounding. A woman at the front desk looked up from her computer. "Oh, Mr. Hale," she said, feigning surprise. "Did you need something?" "I need to speak to Richard," Ethan said, his voice sharp. "Now." Her expression flickered just for a moment. "He's in a meeting." "Not anymore." She hesitated but then picked up the phone and murmured something into the receiver. A few seconds later, a door at the end of the hall swung open. Richard Crenshaw stepped out, adjusting the cuffs of his tailored suit. He was a man who had never once felt the sting of real consequence, his wealth and arrogance woven into every movement. He offered Ethan a smile so insincere it might as well have been printed on glossy paper. "Ethan," he said smoothly, "what brings you by?" Ethan strode forward, stopping inches from him. "You built a goddamn chairlift over my cabin." Richard blinked as if he'd just been told the weather forecast. "Yes," he said as if the realization had only just dawned on him. "Yes, I suppose we did." "You told me?" "I told you we wouldn't build on your land," Richard interrupted, raising a finger. "Technically we haven't. The support beams are on HOA-owned property. The lift itself? Just airspace." Ethan felt his stomach twist. "You never said anything about this." Richard sighed, tilting his head. "We went through all the proper channels. You could have objected during the public hearing." The public? Ethan's jaw tightened. The HOA was notorious for burying important decisions under mountains of paperwork and last-minute notices. He had no doubt they'd ensured he was the last to know. "You think you can just get away with this?" Richard's smirk deepened. "I don't think, Ethan. I know." The casual way he said it, the certainty in his voice, made Ethan's blood boil. "You'll regret this," Ethan said, his voice low. Richard chuckled. "I sincerely doubt that." Ethan turned on his heel and walked out. He could still hear the smirk in Richard's voice as he left, that smug confidence of a man who believed he was untouchable. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the chairlift cables above. Ethan glanced up as another group of riders sailed past, oblivious to the fight happening beneath them. They were enjoying their vacation, their weekend escape, while his home had been turned into a sideshow attraction. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Ethan sat on his porch, watching the chairlift glide overhead like an executioner's blade moving in slow motion. Every few minutes, another group of strangers drifted by, pointing, laughing, snapping pictures of his cabin as if it were a quaint roadside attraction instead of his home. His home. The invasion of privacy wasn't just an inconvenience, it was a violation. Every shadow that passed over his land, every idle conversation he overheard from above, was a reminder that the place he had built for solitude had been turned into someone else's spectacle. He had tried reason, had stormed into that office expecting some kind of recourse, but Richard had made it clear. The HOA had played its game well and he had lost. Or so they thought. The next morning Ethan sat at his kitchen table, scouring legal forums and property rights articles, looking for any loophole, any misstep the HOA might have made. He found nothing. The wording of their zoning approval was airtight. He could fight it, sure, but it would take years, tens of thousands of dollars, and more patience than he had left. A gust of wind rattled the windows. The chairlift groaned. Then came the sound of laughter, light-hearted, detached, floating down from above. Ethan clenched his jaw. They weren't laughing at him, not directly. But they might as well have been. He pushed back from the table and paced, his mind racing. What did he have? No legal leverage. No HOA sympathy. No way to tear the thing down without winding up in court. But he had something buried deep beneath the frustration. A slow smile crept onto his face. If the HOA wanted to act like the chairlift wasn't a problem, he'd make it a problem. The idea took shape quickly. He needed sound. Not just any sound, something subtle at first, barely noticeable. Something riders would second-guess. He needed them nervous. A few creaks, a groan of stressed metal, nothing too obvious. Then once the paranoia took root, he'd escalate. He spent the next few hours gathering what he needed. His outdoor speakers, normally used for playing music on summer nights, would do just fine. They were weatherproof, powerful, and most importantly, he could hide them in the thick treeline around his cabin. The real challenge was the audio. He needed it to feel real. A quick search led him to a treasure trove of sound effects. Metal under strain, bolts loosening, cables fraying. He stitched them together into a sequence, layering in distant voices, fake radio chatter from an imaginary ski lift technician discussing a structural concern. It was perfect. That evening he tested his setup. As the last few riders of the day passed over his cabin, he triggered the first sound, a deep, low groan, the kind metal makes before it gives way. It wasn't loud, but it didn't have to be. One of the riders straightened in their seat. A glance over the shoulder. A subtle shift in posture. Good. The next morning he fine-tuned everything. The sounds would play at random intervals, just frequent enough to spread unease. A groan here, a faint snap there. Nothing constant, just enough to make people second-guess what they were hearing. By midday he had his first real success. A group of 3 skiers drifted overhead when the speakers emitted a sharp creak, followed by a metallic pop. One of them jerked upright. What the hell was that? The others turned, listening. The chair swung slightly as they shifted their weight. I think the cable just... A gust of wind drowned out the rest of his sentence, but the tension was clear. They were gripping the safety bar tighter now, their eyes darting toward the steel cable that carried them. By the time they reached the top of the slope, Ethan knew they'd be talking about it. And if enough people started talking, well, that was when the fun really began. The afternoon brought more riders and with them more paranoia. He kept his timing sporadic, sometimes letting several minutes pass in silence before triggering a deep, wrenching groan just as a chair passed overhead. People flinched. Some whispered. A few clutched their seats a little tighter. He was planting a seed. Late in the afternoon, a woman on one of the lifts actually turned to her friend, wide-eyed. Did you hear that? Hear what? A moment passed. Nothing, she muttered. I thought, never mind. Ethan smiled to himself. That night he checked social media. The ski resort's main page had nothing, but tucked away in smaller threads, a few scattered posts caught his eye. Anyone else notice some weird noises from the lift today? Felt like my chair was rattling more than usual, kind of freaked me out. Small ripples, but ripples nonetheless. By morning those ripples would turn to waves. By the next morning Ethan's plan had already started working. Social media posts trickled in short, uncertain messages from skiers who swore they had heard something off about the lift. The resort's moderators hadn't addressed them yet, probably hoping they would fade into the usual noise of daily complaints. But Ethan knew better. Paranoia was infectious. It just needed a push. He gave it one. This time he added something new to his audio sequence. A faint but unmistakable ping, the precise sound of a steel cable under strain. He timed it perfectly. As a chair carrying 4 snowboarders passed over his property, the speakers let out a deep metallic groan, followed by that sharp, nerve-rattling ping. The reaction was immediate. Whoa, what was that? One of them blurted, twisting in his seat. His friend squinted at the cable above them. Dude, that did not sound right. A gust of wind sent their chair swaying and the first guy sucked in a breath. I don't like this, man. I really don't like this. Ethan bit back a grin. Perfect. As the day went on, more riders started noticing. Some dismissed it as normal wear and tear, but others weren't so sure. He saw one woman clutching the safety bar so tightly her knuckles turned white. Another skier kept glancing at the support towers like he expected one to buckle at any moment. By mid-afternoon, Ethan checked the resort's online reviews. A new one had appeared. Asterisk, lift seemed kinda sketchy today. Heard some weird noises. Hope they're checking maintenance. Asterisk. And then another. Asterisk, never had an issue before, but is anyone else hearing creaking? Freaked me out. Asterisk. The resort finally took notice. A moderator responded to one of the posts with a generic, asterisk, we take safety very seriously and inspect all equipment daily. Thank you for your feedback. Asterisk. It wasn't enough. People weren't reassured. If anything, the acknowledgement only fueled the paranoia. So Ethan took the next step. That evening, he set his speakers to play a low, sporadic chatter, muffled radio static, like the distant conversation of maintenance workers. He made sure it was just distorted enough to sound real, mixing in phrases he had pulled from actual lift repair videos. Asterisk. Yeah, we might need to shut it down for a bit. Asterisk. Asterisk. No, I don't like the way it's shifting. Asterisk. I swear I heard something snap. Then silence. Skiers passing overhead couldn't make out every word, but they didn't have to. All they needed was a whisper of doubt, a creeping sense that something wasn't right. By the time the last lift reached the top, the damage was done. That night, the resort's Facebook page lit up. Asterisk, can someone confirm the lift is safe? I swear I heard workers talking about a problem. Asterisk. Asterisk, are you guys fixing something? My group heard weird noises all day. Asterisk. The resort scrambled to shut it down. Asterisk, all lifts are in proper working order. There are no issues. Asterisk. But Ethan knew they were panicking. He could picture Richard Crenshaw in his overpriced suit, pacing his office, fuming over the sudden storm of bad press. Then came the best part. A local news station picked up the story. It was a short segment, barely 2 minutes long, but it didn't matter. The headline said everything. Concerns raised over chairlift safety at local resort. They hadn't even reported anything conclusive, just skiers' concerns and the resort's reassurances. But that didn't matter either. People didn't remember reassurances. They remembered fear. And just like that, the first real cracks in the HOA scheme began to form. Ethan leaned back in his chair, scrolling through the explosion of online chatter. The news segment had done exactly what he'd hoped, turned suspicion into full-blown panic. Riders weren't just uneasy anymore, they were scared. Parents were questioning whether it was safe for their kids, casual skiers were debating taking the lift at all, and the resort's PR team was in full damage control. But the real gem came that afternoon. A ski patrol worker, clearly fed up with the flood of complaints, posted a now-deleted response on a forum. Asterisk, look, the lift is fine. People are just paranoid. There's no mechanical issue and no one's talking about shutting it down. Stop listening to rumors. Asterisk, it was a fatal mistake. If people weren't worried before, they sure as hell were now. Nothing made a rumor more real than an official trying to deny it. Ethan chuckled. And then came the breaking point. That evening, as the last few riders drifted overhead, he played his final hand. The sounds had worked well, but this would make sure the paranoia stuck for good. A minute before the last chair of the day passed his cabin, he queued up a new sequence. First, the usual creaking, deep and metallic. Then the sharp ping of strained steel. And then, just as the riders were right above his property, he triggered a new sound. A sudden, violent snap, followed by a shrill, metallic screech, like a cable whipping loose, like the entire system was seconds from tearing apart. One of the skiers let out a strangled yelp, gripping the safety bar with white-knuckled hands. Did you hear that? The others turned, wide-eyed, their heads snapping back toward the support towers. Jesus, what the hell was that? The lift swayed slightly in the wind. The group fell dead silent. Ethan could practically feel their terror. When they finally reached the top, they scrambled off the chair in record time, stumbling over themselves in their rush to solid ground. Less than an hour later, the real chaos began. By nightfall, videos started appearing on social media. Asterisk, guys, I swear to God, I just heard the lift cable snap. Asterisk. Asterisk, never taking that chair again. Something is seriously wrong with it. Asterisk. One post in particular sent everything over the edge. Someone had recorded the exact moment Ethan played the sound. The footage was shaky, the audio grainy, but the timing was perfect. Right as the chair passed over the cabin, the unmistakable snap rang out. The person filming let out a panicked curse as the camera jerked wildly. The comments flooded in. Nope. Nope. Not worth dying over. The resort better shut that thing down before someone gets hurt. And then, the final nail in the coffin. A prominent ski safety account shared the clip, captioning it, this needs to be investigated immediately. Ethan sat back watching the dominoes fall. By the next morning the HOA was in full crisis mode. The resort announced an emergency maintenance inspection of the lift, though Ethan knew that was just their way of stalling for time. They had no idea what was actually wrong, because nothing was wrong. Richard Crenshaw's name was dragged through the mud in every comment section. People were demanding answers. Local journalists started digging into the HOA's involvement. And then, the final beautiful twist of fate. Ski resort lawyers got involved. Not because of Ethan. No, they didn't even know he existed. But because if something went wrong now, the resort would be liable. The HOA had pushed the chairlift project through so aggressively, cutting through red tape and ignoring concerns, that they had left the resort exposed. And with public confidence plummeting, the lawyers made their move. They pulled out. The lift was shut down indefinitely. Ethan read the announcement 3 times just to make sure he wasn't imagining it. The statement was vague, filled with corporate jargon about unexpected mechanical concerns, and the utmost priority of guest safety. But he knew the truth. They were cutting their losses before the entire resort's reputation went up in flames. He stepped onto his porch that evening, staring up at the silent, motionless chairs hanging lifelessly in the air. No more laughter. No more invasion of his home. Just peace. Then, like poetic justice, he spotted Richard standing near the main lodge, locked in a furious conversation with resort executives. Even from a distance, Ethan could see the rage in his posture, the desperate way his hands gestured as he tried, and failed, to salvage his grand project. Ethan smiled. The HOA had built a chairlift over his cabin. He had torn it down without lifting a finger.